This episode is brought to you by Deal. Managing a global team is complex. Deal makes it simpler with payroll, HR, IT, and compliance, all in one place. That's why over 35,000 businesses trust Deal to hire, pay, and manage teams worldwide. See how Deal works at deal.com/Adrian Tan to learn more. That's DEEL.com/ADRIANTAN. Deal, your forever people platform. Hello, Mark. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
For people who know you for the first time, how do you normally introduce yourself?
Great question. It gets complicated. I am a fractional commercial strategy lead for startups. I also am the general manager of Singapore's Fractional Directory. So I'm very focused on future of work and fractional employment. But in terms of how I introduce myself for the audience, it really depends. If it's a startup founder, then I focus on the fractional side of my career and how I can help them. And if it's somebody else in the ecosystem, then I tend to give a little bit more of the full explanation of how I got to where I am now.
I often fumble with the answer, especially when I'm in a setting where there's mixed crowd. I do not know what to tell them. And I think there's some kind of new challenge for people who are going down this similar path that we're going through. And what that path is, we'll learn more about that. So I'm really fascinated by what you're doing right now. And of course, interested to know how you got there. So before that, you could just rewind the clock and help us to understand where you were from and how it led you to what you're doing right now.
Sure. Rewinding the clock is about 20 years back for me. I first came to the region in 2006 to do my advanced degree. I did an MBA and decided that I was going to stay within the region. I did 7 years with American Express, starting in Hong Kong, around the world through Canada, the UK, and then back to Singapore. And at the end of about 7 years, I decided I really wanted to go back to my roots, which were more smaller companies and working on my own. So I founded my own loyalty consultancy. I've always been fascinated by loyalty programs, consumer psychology, customer engagement, all of those pieces. And I felt like there was a really big opportunity within Asia. So I started in 2013, built up a small agency of about 8 or 9 people, had a fair number of decent sized projects, including designing a frequent flyer program in Hong Kong. And that went well for a while until it didn't. That's a much longer story around how these things go. But I think for a lot of consultants, or really anybody who's been independent, it's familiar, right? You build something and one wrong move can kind of set you back quite a ways. So I landed the company gracefully, as I like to say. Nobody lost their job without their will. They were all able to find somewhere else before we had to get rid of them. I was able to sell my IP and basically acqui-hire into a larger company that was on the startup journey as well. And we built that company in the time I was there from about 40 people to about 200. And we launched a flagship product in the loyalty technology space. That got us through COVID. I was leading their global partnerships team. And at the end of COVID, as so many people did, I had a bit of a reevaluation around where I wanted to spend my time and how I wanted to spend my time. And I decided to take a step out of the global kind of a role. Leading a global partnerships team is great. However, you're on calls at all hours of the day and night. The travel used to be a lot. And post-COVID, I suspected it was going to come back. And I decided I wanted to focus on Singapore. So being based in Singapore, I took one for my patriotic duty, and I joined a Temasek-backed venture called U Rewards. At the time, it wasn't called that, but it's the coalition operator for the second largest coalition in Singapore. So backed by our sovereign wealth fund, Temasek, it was a grocery, pharmacy, convenience store, bank, and a few other industries, all rolled into one single loyalty program. I got that as head of partnerships. I got that through the launch, helped them launch, and then shortly thereafter, again, took a very hard look at where I wanted to be. And that's what led me to this portfolio career that I've developed at this point. I realized that any kind of a senior role in Singapore tends to come with some very strong trade-offs around work-life balance. There's a very traditional way of thinking in Singapore, which is you work until 10 minutes after the boss leaves. You work until not just the job is done, but until everybody can see that you've worked the hardest. And You typically don't make it home for dinner if you've got young kids, as I do. You're not home until they're almost ready to sleep. Those are trade-offs that tend to be accepted in Singapore by a large number of people because the cost of living here is so high that it feels like there's no other way to do it. And most people have the problem of having to have multiple generations help with raising the kids, or a helper raising the kids, because often 2 incomes are required to sustain the lifestyle here. We took a look at that, my wife and I, and decided to try to find a different way to do things. And that's really the genesis of the portfolio career and the emphasis on fractional that I came up with in early 2023. And since then, it's been a series of experiments and iterations. And I dare say, knock on wood, that it's been mostly successful, and I'm quite happy with where we've gotten the configuration to at this point.
Is that kind of work arrangement in Singapore something that is Singapore-centric or across the entire Asia?
It's worldwide, actually, Adrian. I think we've seen a lot of emphasis on rethinking the relationship with work across the world. And it started with the whole return to office question. Do people really want to go back after COVID? But it's gone farther than that. It's gone to the question of, do I really want to put work first? Do I really want to share my WhatsApp or my always on personal phone number with the people I work with so that they can contact me anytime they wish? Or do I want to have some acceptable boundaries in life? I think it was France, where there was actually a legislation passed that said employers do not have the right to contact employees outside of their working hours. And I think that was very symbolic of the kinds of mindset shifts that people are having with their relationship with work. So I see it across the world. In Singapore, I actually believe we are lagging somewhat in terms of those mindset shifts, because I think there's a lot more traditional culture around ways of working that's a little more, let me say, less flexible, more rigidly defined. So we're slower perhaps to the party.
There was a news article about a MediaCorp artist, Sharon Au. She moved over to France to work, and in the Singaporean mode, she continues to send WhatsApp messages to her peers after hours in weekend, and she got a warning from HR.
I remember that. And yeah, the adjustment is real. And I think for those of us who work across cultures, it's even more prevalent.
To some extent, especially in the olden days where executives are required to be almost 24/7. But with the advancement of AI and how good AI is right now, isn't there a way for AI to alleviate some of this load from executive, or is AI still just something that could help with the frontline crews?
Oh no, I absolutely believe AI makes a huge difference in what we're able to accomplish. One of the things that I'm experimenting with this year is exactly this. How can AI make us all more efficient and most importantly, more effective? Efficiency, I was talking to a friend the other day. Efficiency is a great measure of automating things that may not actually matter. But effectiveness is about using AI or whatever tool you choose in areas that really drive the business forward. So I think I've honestly been focusing too much on efficiency so far, but I already see the massive gains in how much less time it takes to do things like setting up my invoicing or the repetitive communications. This year, my goal is to move into the effectiveness space and to get AI really embedded. I think every executive can benefit from the AI tools that are out there. I do think, though, that the smaller and the more independent you are, the more freedom and flexibility you have to develop those AI solutions as trusted coworkers or trusted partners. I really like thinking of AI as the gifted intern or the sounding board, a function where the AI is really a coworker rather than a tool, because I think that you get the most out of these working relationships with the intelligent piece of the learning by treating them as a longer-term collaborator rather than a point solution.
It's really, really tempting to lean into efficiency rather than effectiveness, because every day you only have 24 hours.
Yeah.
Technically speaking, you only have 12 because you need to sleep. And it's just so sexy to go through your to-do list and then check them off one by one. But sometimes it also begs the question, am I actually doing the right thing? Or am I just going through the motion of checking off the checkbox and making myself feel good?
There's a really great content creator, I'm sure you've seen, his concept around efficiency and effectiveness is about $10 work versus $100 versus $1,000 versus $10,000 work, right? The $10 work is the work that feels good to check off the to-do list. But the truth is it's not moving the needle on our business. It's something that has to be done. If you didn't do it, it would probably eventually cause you to suffer, but it's not going to transform your process, lead to new clients or any of those things. And I think we all get very tempted into this $10 work because it does feel great to just say, I had 15 things on my to-do list and, oh, I cleared my inbox to 0. Now I have a great feeling about my inbox, but every email that I cleared was a newsletter. I've learned something, but I haven't actually accomplished anything today to help my clients or make money in a direct sense.
What is your most effective use of AI right now in the course of your work?
Great question. I think for me, I'm still in the early stages, I freely admit. I have found 2 great pieces of value. One is in the initial drafting stage of my ideas. And the way I use it is this. I've built a prompt where it knows me and knows my business and functions as a mirror to myself. So I've asked it to be a gifted, hopefully, strategic consultant with 15 to 20 years of experience, familiar with all of the best structures and model. The prompt on these things, as many of you may know, is one of the most important pieces in getting the most out of AI. The difference between crafting a full paragraph of context, explaining what you'd like back and how you'd like the model to reason versus just writing it like a Google search and saying, solve this for me, is night and day. And experimenting with that has been huge for me. So I use it to partner. I'm launching a line of workshops this year to help answer some of the questions that come up repeatedly, where I've had lots of coffee chats with people to help them. We need to systematize that and make it a little bit more accessible, or I will be spending all of my time doing that. So I came up with the idea. I know what I think I want, but it's a great way to bounce that through the AI as a sounding board and say, where does this idea work? Where does this idea suck? Where do I need help? Where have I not thought of something? That's the first area that I've really delved into heavily. I'm also starting to look at building out some workflows, and the multi-step capabilities are where I think, again, you can debate efficiency versus effectiveness, but you can really create some cool things. So I've solved the newsletter problem for you. I've built a script where any newsletter that I read, and I do still skim most of them, any newsletter that really provokes some interesting thoughts, I've got a special folder in Gmail. As soon as I throw it in there, it's labeled for future thought. The AI picks it up. I've built a prompt that summarizes it specifically for what I'm looking for out of these articles, which is generally the same thing. It's themes and trends that I can use to be more effective in my work. And it takes it, parses everything in that email, writes a summary and posts it into my Notion database where I keep all of these ideas that I use to run my business. That's not revolutionary by any means, but it is so much faster than any way that I could have done that before. And I used to copy and paste links to the articles and then never go back and read them again and all of these kinds of things. Now I've got a database and it's tagged. In my knowledge base, I've got tags for things, and each one of these is tagged with AI summary. So I know where it came from, I know when it was uploaded, I know what it's about, and I can delve back into it with the title of whatever the subject line of the email was. That's fantastic for feeling organized. It's too early for me to say that it's actually helped really make me organized, but it certainly feels better because now instead of keeping that article in my head thinking I've got to go back and think about it later, I know exactly where it sits. And I'm a big believer in downloading or offloading these things that sit in our brains as mental bookmarks that keep our minds and our lives messy. The more you can get them into external systems, I think the better off you are as a thinker.
I have a suggestion for you to extend that workflow into, which is to turn it into a quiz.
Oh.
And then send you the quiz and make sure that you pass the quiz.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, if I want to get it into my brain and really internalize the knowledge, I think that's a terrific idea. And actually quizzes is something I've been looking at for my workshop or for my business as well, to self-categorize the kinds of people who would benefit from the kinds of things that I offer. So I do think there's a lot of capability there to make those really good and interactive using AI.
You actually spend the first 6 years of your career in stage management, radio podcasting, and even events production. How did that experience actually shape how you perceive and operate in the course of your work?
That's a great question. I wondered that for probably the first 10 years of my career myself. I never managed my career in a traditional sense. I did things that I thought I would enjoy and hoped that it would all work out towards some kind of a coherent story. And I can honestly say for the first few years, it had no story behind it. Looking back now, though, I wouldn't change a thing that I did. And I can say that that story actually makes sense. I majored in school in psychology and sociology, which is all about the study of people and behavior. Doing stage management and radio sportscasting and DJing and all of these events and production things actually led me to a skill set that's very applicable for business and strategy. I learned how to relate to very diverse groups of stakeholders. I learned how to perform under pressure because when you're doing live events, as you obviously well know, you have a very strong need to be able to navigate in the moment, deal with the unexpected. And those are actually very transferable skills in business. So where I've ended up as an expert on consulting, psychology, future of work, all of those are actually drawing on those transferable skills from the first 6 or so years of my career, where I learned how to navigate in very uncertain, fluid situations where there was no opportunity to go back and rewrite a document. For instance, you're on stage or you're calling a show. If the performer doesn't enter the stage at the moment they're supposed to, the audience is waiting. There's no way to go back and kind of say, can we try that again? So I think that led me to really be able to think on my feet and to be able to enter a very wide diversity of situations, whether it's industry or subject matter. I've built as a generalist, and I think that the generalist feeling that I have now is very much rooted in the generalist things that I did at my young age, sort of the 20 to 27-year-old time frame.
It sounds like a skill set that I would imagine all of our minister and senior civil servant need to have, because none of them seems to be able to deliver something without a script in front of them. And often I find that to be very jarring because it just breaks the authenticity. It's like they're forced to say something not because they're saying it, because they mean it.
I fully and completely agree, and I have to reveal my biases here. I've in the process of trying for citizenship. This is my home, so I don't want to say too many pointed political comments. I'll just say that I heartily agree. My wife is actually involved in public speaking coaching and training, and so we do often have these conversations around public communications and where they could be perhaps improved. I'll leave it at that for political correctness. But
Okay,
if anybody
moving
from
on.
ICA is listening, I'm very happy to contribute my expertise for the betterment of Singapore.
Now, founding a loyalty consulting company and later selling it is a major milestone. What are some of the most valuable lessons you learned from?
Lessons are always learned by the mistakes we make. So I have a very long list of lessons, thankfully. I think one of the clearest lessons for me was around building culture. And it's a lesson that I've carried forward in everything I've done and in a lot of the coaching work that I do with founders. Working with people that you really like and really enjoy spending time with is one of the greatest luxuries you can have in your working life. And it's not a luxury you typically get in a larger corporation where you don't control the hiring decisions. When you're a founder, it's the ultimate luxury because you can hand select every single person on that team at the beginning to be somebody that you would be comfortable spending your entire day with. Keeping that as you grow becomes ever harder. So I'd say lesson number one was around how to preserve the culture and how to really define the culture through growth. Define and preserve the culture through that period of growth. The second lesson is probably around not trying to do too much. I built a company and I had a very risk-averse way of thinking about it. I wanted to build a company that could be an enduring legacy, but not necessarily a venture-funded unicorn. I would rather be around and be small 10 years from founding versus grow big and then die out or flame out. Now, unfortunately, I didn't grow that big, but I still managed to die out. So that was kind of the worst of both worlds. However, in doing that, I know why it happened. And those mistakes were, I was trying to build both a product company and a services company simultaneously. I was quite decent with the consulting side of the business, and we had an idea for a big product. But that was not one company. It should never have been one company. And so trying to build both of them diluted focus to the point where that caused us to be less successful than we would have been if we'd stayed focused. The second problem was we were successful as a consultancy, but because of the diluted focus, I didn't recognize that we had spent too much time working with one client, and too much of our revenue came from one specific client. So when that client ran into some problems, that caused our entire company to run into problems, because out of the 8 or 9 people on payroll, 6 or 7 of them were dedicated to serving that client. So a milestone-based project where the client is responsible for meeting the milestone is a very dangerous and a very poor construct, because all the client has to do is not meet the milestone, and they've essentially killed off your project by lack of oxygen. So I learned a lot of practical things in the way I built the company and the mistakes that I made. I also learned the most important piece for me was around culture and around really ensuring that the people you work with are the right ones for the team and the right ones for you personally. And that's the lesson that I've taken through to the work that I've done subsequently in building and maintaining cultures of companies I advise for and the companies I consult with or coach the founders.
I had a HR consultancy, and I would say 95% of our business were pegged to a government grant. And when that stopped working, we were like, oh my God, what is going on here? We were still trying to clear as many cases as we can, but when the announcement was out, everything just froze up and applications are not going through, and it was really tough.
That's probably the single biggest learning that I took out of the experience was diversify your clients and spread your risk. It's actually very tied to this future of work idea where I think employees or workers or talent or however we want to call ourselves at this point have realized that decoupling from a single organization as a sole source of salary is a very smart way to hedge risk. I have this debate with employees or workers, especially in Singapore, where a lot of people say, how can you take such a high risk profile with what you do? And I actually break it down and say, let's talk about this for a second. What is risk to you? Because if you work at a Lazada or a Meta or a Google, or even a DBS or a Singtel in the local context, those are big companies, but they're going to guarantee 100% of your salary until the day they decide they no longer need you. And then your salary or your income drops to zero unless you have diversified your career. For me, any one client makes up no more than 15, 20, 30% of my income. And if that client disappears, I can coast through on 60 or 80% of my income while I replace that other portion. Now, which one of those is really lower risk if we think about it? I'm very happy with the risk profile of a portfolio career, and that's where I see the big shift in employment, that people are starting to think that way more and more frequently.
I think the attraction of portfolio career is also in the corporate scene. It doesn't seem to be driven by logic anymore. You can see companies with record quarterly earning, and then they proceed to fire 1,000 people. Granted that they have perhaps a valid reason to do so because it's always based on something moving forward-looking. But still, it feels very jarring for individuals like you and I, for people who read the news. Why is that even happening? Why is Microsoft making so much money yet firing 100 engineers? It just doesn't make sense. Which I think is a good segue for us to understand a bit about the motivation for you behind the Fractional Directory Singapore. How did that idea come about?
That's very tied to my personal story in terms of my deciding to go into fractionals. As I mentioned earlier, in early 2023, after I left U Rewards, I thought about what I wanted to do and decided that a traditional corporate wasn't the right kind of a job structure for me at the time. I decided to lean into fractional and startups specifically because of my decade-long experience working on various forms of startups, and because I really believed that there's a high value for startups to be working with fractional resources, to pay less money to get more experience at a stage when it's desperately needed for those startups to have really senior advice, but they definitely aren't able to pay for it in a traditional job environment. after doing that, I became fractional and I focused on strategy and commercial, go-to-market for early stage startups. I realized very quickly that there's a network effect that can benefit these companies even more. And that is that they typically need help across multiple dimensions. Now, I'm relatively expert in commercial strategy, having done it for many years. But if you ask me to be your fractional head of marketing or your fractional head of technology, I'm clearly not the right person for that. My value to you is as a connector. And as a connector, my value is only as good as the number of connections I can offer. So in looking at this, I quickly realized there's space for something that brings more of a network effect to bear on this problem that startups have. And I talk about startups, but it applies to SMEs and it applies to larger companies as well. They have perhaps more structural barriers to implement these kinds of working arrangements. So I looked at this and thought we could build out a community, some kind of a cooperative, a referral network, or even a mini agency. And these models exist. But I thought to myself at one point, well, congratulations, you've just invented what, another McKinsey, another Accenture? Like, that's not quite what we're after here. And so I was thinking about this problem and browsing my various sources of inspiration when I came across this fractional directory in New Zealand. And I thought, this is perfect. It's just a directory. It's not a marketplace. We're not trying to monetize heavily here, but we've got a list of people like a phone book that you can call up who have very specific expertise, whether it's go-to-market like myself, or whether it's technology, finance. And they've actually done something, we've done something really clever with this. What we've done with the fractional directory sorts out not just subject matter expertise or job title, but it sorts out deliverables. So the example would be, you need a CFO because you're raising money. That skill set is very different from a CFO who specializes in cross-border trade finance. And you can sort and search in the directory by those deliverables rather than just by the job title or the level of experience. So I decided to call up people in New Zealand and just say, listen, I think we should bring this to Singapore. And we did a deal and decided that Singapore would be our second launch market for the fractional directory. So we launched in September 2024. And what we saw was a huge interest level on what I call the supply side. The number of people working in this fractional space is surprisingly high. We have over 350 profiles in the fractional directory, and it ranges across every kind of job function. The demand side, I'll be very honest, takes longer to develop. The number of companies using the fractional directory for hiring has grown slowly and steadily, but is still not as many as we would like. So our big goal now is to really get to the potential of this platform to match companies, to educate those companies on the benefits of hiring this fractional style employee.
What would be your personal definition of someone who is in fractional work? And my next question would be, and for most people who are unfamiliar with fractional work, isn't it the same as gig worker or freelancing?
Great question. And yes, we do get that question quite a lot. I always joke that these industries that develop their own terminologies, one of the reasons is so they can have big conferences where everybody can go debate the terminology for days on end. It's happened in every industry I've been involved with. Fractional is a term that has a place, but I would say its definition isn't fully aligned yet. A lot of people would say fractional is just a fancy term for freelance or gig. I will tell you, my feeling and definition around fractional is a little bit different. Fractional workers, in the definition that I use, are actually a part of the team. They're actually joining the company. They're not there full-time, it's true. But they are part of the team with email, with Slack, if the company uses Slack, or Microsoft Teams. And they are, generally speaking, considered to be a full member of that team. They may only be on call or answering emails on specific days or for a specific number of hours. But I think it's a very key distinction as compared to your typical freelance contractor consultant, where they're really in to do a specific deliverable and that's all. The other thing about fractional that I use as part of the definitions, it tends to be more open-ended. It tends to be around doing a function that provides value for the company rather than just delivering a specific project. So your typical consulting gig has a specific deliverable and a specific time frame associated with that deliverable. Your typical fractional gig looks more like you are our chief marketing officer. You are delivering the deliverables of a chief marketing officer, which include leading a team, by the way. And you're doing that in X number of hours or X number of days per week, per month. So the team leadership as an actual direct reporting line is a difference. And the structure of the job itself being within the organization is another difference that I see. Those are really the two critical pieces. But people tend to argue maybe interim, like a mat leave cover, is that fractional if you don't do it full time? There's a lot of gray area associated with this for me. And I would say the personal approach that I take is if I'm solving a problem for a client, I'm really not too concerned about the terminology about that. But when it comes to the fractional directory, we try to be very clear about the ideal fractional role so that companies who are hiring are aligned in their expectations in terms of what they're getting.
Since it's such a gray area, where do you see such fractional work going wrong? And how can fractional executives and companies avoid these pitfalls?
You've hit on exactly the area that the workshop will start to cover. I think let me approach that from both sides, Adrian. I think you've made a really good point. For workers, the expectation that it's just like a full-time job, but it's only for part-time, is one of the problems that I see. A different mindset is required to work fractionally. You have to be very comfortable both leading and setting strategy at a very fast pace, and in leading and mentoring a team that can execute that strategy even when you're not there. That skill set takes some cultivation, and if you've been in a larger organization, especially for a long time, it's a skill set that you may not have had to develop because the support systems and networks tend to be much bigger and much slower moving in large organizations. So I see for employees setting that mindset shift that you are going to have to context switch regularly, and you are going to have to hit the ground extremely quickly in terms of time to value. Those are two very critical pieces. For employers, I think it's about setting expectations. And obviously that ties into the employee as well. It's about knowing what you're bringing the person on board for. What problem and what pain are they solving for? What resources do they need within your organization and your team? If you're hiring a fractional independent contributor, I would argue that you're hiring a freelancer and you're hiring a consultant, because that person is only able to deliver their goals when they're engaged with the company. And if that's part-time or fractional, that means the goals aren't moving forward when that person isn't there. If you're hiring a true fractional leader, they're leading some part of your team. And that means that you're giving them a very large amount of trust that they can lead the team effectively in less than a full-time position. That design will look different for every company. There is no one answer to this. And that's actually one of the reasons that we don't build out a platform or a marketplace, because person A will not be right for company B. And that individualized matching process needs to happen in a personalized way for companies to get this right. So we've partnered with a few HR partners to try to help companies screen for this and make sure that they avoid those pitfalls that we've described here.
There is this perceived lack of stability when it comes to gig work or even fractional work. How do you address and how do you personally address concerns around sustainability in fractional?
There will be a shakeout, as there is in any new industry, where there's a massive swell of interest and adoption. Then there is a group of people who will prove to be good at this and another group that will not prove to be good at this. For the ones who are doing fractional work as a true career and lifestyle choice, I actually think it's extremely sustainable. Companies have problems, and companies have always had problems and will always continue to have problems.
And there are going to be more companies.
There are going to be more companies. There are going to be more smaller companies as we see the efficiency gains from using tools like AI. But there will always be a need for some of these pieces like accountancy, strategy, technology. And this way of working is so much more investment friendly. It allows you to bootstrap further. It allows you to make your investment dollars go farther than hiring a full-time senior person. So if your choices are hire a junior person and hope they learn fast enough, hire a senior person, but for only part of the time, or blow your budget hiring a senior person full-time, this is a really nice Goldilocks ground, the middle ground to bring somebody on board. Sustainability comes from actually being good at delivering, if I think about this from the perspective of the fractional worker themselves. So it comes from learning the systems and processes that make you effective in this very unique working context. However, as we talked about previously, the risk profile for this is actually less, and the ability to maintain a strong income through working fractionally, I think is equally high or higher than a traditional corporate job. There's a caveat to that, which is that you have to be able to source your clients. And for folks who are not business development or partnerships oriented, that's where the real challenge around sustainability comes in. If you're a finance person, you may have never sold a deal in your life, because if you were into sales, you would have been a salesperson. Therefore, you've got to learn a new skill set, or you've got to partner or find a way to get that skill set driving business to you in order to make the role truly sustainable. And that's where I see the biggest challenge, and probably a credible question about sustainability for folks who don't have enough referrals and enough business momentum yet.
Good work obviously in itself is a great way to make it sustainable, to prove yourself, to get that word of mouth going. But for people who are new to this, it's the very first time they are seeking out fractional work, how would you suggest they position themselves to help them stand out amongst the sea of same?
Network is really the most critical piece of this. There's a lot of material out there around how to create your ICP, and you can't throw a stone on LinkedIn without finding huge amounts of advice as to how to create your own solo operation. But I honestly believe that for the vast majority of people, their first couple of clients have to come from their network and the people who already know their work. Until you have testimonials, the only people who can attest to what a good job you do are the people you've worked with before. So finding those people and using those to unpick this thread and to pull on the string until you find the person in their network who might need what you need. For me, I found every founder has a problem. Discovering their problem is my job. Discovering whether I can solve it is my next job. And if I can't, then we can potentially work together. And if I can't, then hopefully I can refer them to somebody who can solve it. I think as a new fractional, it is hard work to break into. And I think knowing what problem you solve better than anybody else is time well spent. But I also think that even once you know that problem, you're best off starting with your network versus starting by throwing another voice into the massive cacophony that is LinkedIn or X or these other business networking sources, because I think it's very, very hard to make a name for yourself from zero. Now, if you're famous, if you've come out of a role at a C-level in a large multinational, I think you have it a lot easier, because you post one post saying you're now available for consulting and advisory work, and you probably, I know people who have multiple inbound inquiries within 24 hours of declaring themselves on the market. For the rest of us who are maybe not quite so lucky, I think it is a long, hard journey.
Let's turn the table around and help companies out there who might be looking and exploring hiring fractional people. What are some of the things that they should start looking out for?
The key is to really understand the deliverable and the outcome that you're after. And we talked about this a little bit when we talk about the stages that a company might be in. This is easier for some roles than others, but really surprisingly few companies define their hiring needs in the terms of the problem that they need to solve or that the value that they need to see delivered. They often leave that at a very high level to say, well, our marketing isn't effective, so we need to hire a marketing person. That may be a true statement, but it does not drive you towards a useful description of the value that you want somebody to provide, whether it's a full-time hire or a fractional hire. If you're making a full-time hire, perhaps you just hire the best full source, full stack marketer that you can find, and you hope for the best and you refine it when they're there. But that's not the most efficient way to do it. And if you're hiring a fractional, you need to be much more focused. You need to really delve into what is the problem that I need to solve? What is my burning platform? Or you need to say, what is the value that I want to see in this organization 12 months from now that isn't there now? And that drives corporations to a couple of really important outcomes. Number one, it clarifies the problem and it allows them to write a JD even if they go to a full-time hire later. And number two, it allows them to start to think about what the compensation for that role should look like. When you're designing fractional, you're outside of the typical job bands. Fractional roles can range from a couple of hours a month all the way up to a couple of days a week. And so understanding whether this is a $10 million problem that we're solving or a $100,000 problem we're solving starts to allow you to think about what fraction you want to hire. Is it a big fraction or a small fraction to solve that problem? And those are the real conditions for success in hiring that companies don't understand well enough yet. And this is one of the reasons that we see fractional hiring taking longer to embed as a way of hiring as compared to traditional full-time employment.
As this area continue to evolve very slowly, and given that you've been working on this for quite some time, how do you personally foresee this to turn into in the future?
This is the year that we see a tipping point. And I say that with some data to back it up. I feel like last year we saw a fairly decent number of employees starting to brand themselves as fractional. When I spoke to them, and I probably had 100 to 200 coffee chats over the course of the last year with aspiring fractionals, a large portion of them, I asked them the direct question: would you go back to a full-time role if somebody offered you that full-time role? At the beginning of the year, 80% said, yes, I'm doing this because I don't know what else to do right now. The job market is quite poor, and people are very honest about this. By the end of the year, 60 to 70% were saying, no, this is a choice I have made, and I'm sticking with this choice. The number of titles on LinkedIn that use fractional as part of their title has gone up by 300-400% over the course of the last year. So fractional workforce is here to stay. And the reason I say we're going to see a shift in 2025 for the employment to be more common and more successful is I'm now seeing companies following that path. I participated in a careers forum for encore careers, as they're calling it. More senior individuals looking to contribute to the workforce as a non-traditional, flexible workforce over the course of their, say, 50s, 60s, and onwards. That's something Workforce Singapore is very into, Ministry of Manpower is looking at, and they're making an effort to reduce barriers for companies to hire in these more flexible models. In the Singapore context, we know that once government starts to be involved with these things, the barriers are artificially reduced. Companies tend to give these things a try because they're strongly encouraged economically. And they tend to bed in to a greater or lesser extent because companies then, they solve the problems once and they can continue to use that solution going forward. So I see the government supporting it. I see companies under a lot of financial stress and thinking about new ways to solve their problems. So the awareness of fractional is growing rapidly, and companies are starting to inquire, how can we do this in a way that's cost effective, driving value, and doesn't require us to bring on somebody for a full-time role when what's really needed is just a piece of that full-time role. So those are the data points that I'm seeing. Multiple inquiries this year, government making a real effort to push for flexible workforce, and the fractionals who are in the market now tend to be the ones who want to do this as a long-term plan rather than just an opportunistic way to survive until the next full-time job offer.
In Singapore, when the government steps in, they will snowplow their way to make sure the path is clear for everybody. And we are indeed seeing a lot more companies more willing to pick up fractional executives. My own hypothesis is, yes, you can outsource your junior workers to Malaysia, to Vietnam, but do you seriously want to outsource your C-suite to the same countries? I don't think so. I think if you have some secret sauce based in Singapore, you still want to retain it here. And if you would still be concerned about payroll and all that, fractional leadership is really the way to go.
I do believe still that the Venn diagram of all of these things that have shifted in the workplace, the remote work, there's an overlap with fractional, but in a market like Singapore, actually, Singapore fractionals serving Singapore companies is still where the sweet spot lies. I think there is still real value to people being on site. And we're very lucky. We're in a small enough market that being on site is a relatively easy thing to do. In the US, fractional has been almost 100% correlated with remote work because fractionals can be anywhere in a very large country and the work can be anywhere in that same very large country. So they have to hop on a plane if they need to go see somebody on site. We're lucky enough to hop on the MRT and be there within an hour. I think that is a real positive force for fractionals in Singapore. And you're right that trying to offshore that at a senior level, you lose quite a lot of benefits around the context, around the ability to be in office daily. I do see a few fractionals who do a fly-in, fly-out model, and they're based in a lower cost market like Bali or Phuket or even Johor. But I think those are still a very small percentage of the fractional talent that we have available in the market.
I hope it really pans out like what we both think, and that would help to generate not just more opportunities for everybody here, but I think it really moved into what the future of work should be like for many people who, like you said earlier on, want to center all their life around the key priorities. It's not just about having that 24/7 after work Zoom call at 11 p.m. There are much more things in life that one should value over work. Having said that, it's not asking you to take a backseat to work. Work is still very much part of our life, but to trying to strike a balance between all of that. And I think fractional work is indeed a way to do so. And with that, thank you so much for coming on to the show, Mark, for sharing with us more about yourself, your journey, and most importantly, helping the fractional community here to be more prevalent in the scene and also to help people along the way on what they should do if they're trying to step into this space. For people who's keen to learn more about yourself, Fractional Directory, where can they go to?
I'm happy to talk about this all day long. I'm hopefully easily found on LinkedIn. If you're interested in more information about the Fractional Directory, the website is simple as can be. It is fractionaldirectory.sg. And at that point, if you're a fractional worker, you can create a profile. If you're a company, you can create a company profile and search the directory. Anybody who wishes to talk about this or needs any help, I'm always available. And yeah, LinkedIn is the best place to find me at Mark Mullinix, CLMP. That should differentiate me quite quickly.
You will also be in the show notes, so people can just click in and go straight to your LinkedIn. And once again, thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me.